The Sting by C.C. Hogan. Chapter 1. Introducing Smell. If you don't wake up in the morning with your fingers stuffed up your nose wondering where he'd spent the rest of the night, well, you ain't Smell. To Smell, small things like where his finger had spent the night could spoil his day as easily as someone dropping a piano on his brother's Ford Escort. Actually, strike that. Smell would pay at least a fiver to watch his brother's precious rust bucket flattened by a major chord. And let's face it, he hadn't seen a fiver since the last time he'd poked around in his mother's purse, and his head was still hurting from that trip. Waking up in the morning was an effort on most days for Smell, and it seemed the more important the day, the more fun that was going to be had, the harder he found it to wake up. It was like some dreadful self-fulfilling prophecy, where the greater the chance was that he was going to have something good happen to him, the less likely he was going to be awake for it. Smell worried that on the day he found out he'd actually successfully chatted up a beautiful bird, he'd never be able to wake up again. "Melvin, I need your washing and I need you to be up." Smell cringed as the voice of his mum echoed through the floorboards. Her words, despite being muffled by the walls as if she had shoved a sock in her mouth, hit his ears at a volume that would give a low-flying jumbo jet a run for its money. On cue, a jumbo passed overhead at an almost apologetic volume. Melvin Arnold Lane. Smell wondered if being given an unspeakable name would count as mitigating circumstances, as he thrust one slightly grey foot from under the blankets and, with a gentle pop, removed his finger from his nose. That was one habit he's going to have to get rid of before he got himself a girlfriend. "What washing?" Smell tried to focus on the remaining patches of floor in his 10-foot by 12 bedroom as he swayed into a standing position. "That would be anything at carpet level that doesn't look like the carpet," his mother explained as she bursted through his door like Jack Regan. Jane Lane, who wished she had married a man with a different surname, was nearly a foot shorter and 2 feet wider than her son. Despite this, Smell was pretty sure she could pick him up and chuck him into next century, assuming the world wasn't going to end in 1984, of course. "And in case you're thinking there's probably something left in your cupboard that you can wear, there isn't. Unless you count the pyjamas with teddy bears on that you got for your 10th birthday. Top of your wish list, as I remember." "But what am I going to wear?" "I suggest you steal one of your brother's t-shirts again, and you can wear the jeans you've been wearing for the last week. They appear to be more vertical than you are." Smell became aware that he was lying down again, though he had no idea when that had happened. "I'll get your dad to cut your jeans off you later with his blowtorch." And with that, Smell's mother jumped out the window and abseiled down the outside of the house, clutching most of his wardrobe. Or at least in his half-awake imagination she did. He suspected that she probably used the door as normal. Smell cautiously glanced at the expanse of bright lime-green carpet that had been uncovered and wondered if they realised why he spent so much time burying it with clothes. It took Smell 3 attempts to get into his jeans. His mother had been right, they were definitely stiffer than they'd been last week. He never had trouble getting the first leg in, but it was trying to pick up the second high enough that caused him the problems. Eventually he managed to wedge himself between the carpet and the wall, and only gave himself the smallest smack in the face with his knee. Out on the landing there was an extended moment of hesitation, where he debated between the bathroom, the bog, and his brother's bedroom. His biology eventually stepped in and decided for him, leaving his brother's bedroom and the bathroom at 2 and 3 on his to-do list. Smell's brother had been out since early morning. He'd finished his A-levels and had got himself a job as a milkie while he worked out what to do next. Richard Dickhead Lane was an organised sort of bloke, as long as everything revolved round his precious car. He'd passed his test back in January, but he'd owned the car for over a year, spending everything he had on taking it from complete rust bucket to sublimely sleek and polished rust bucket with go faster black and chrome around the rusty red body. To be fair, it was an Escort Mexico, so it was pretty quick, or would have been if it were not so knackered. Either way, he was out on his rounds and would not be back till nearly midday, so Smell had the luxury of choosing just the right shirt. "Hurry up, Melvin, it's lunchtime and your brother will be back in a minute." "Oh, fuck. I heard that." Smell grabbed the nearest shirt from the neat pile near the bedroom door and legged it into the bathroom. Despite his nickname and his crispy jeans, Smell was amazingly fussy about getting his teeth cleaned properly. He would spend ages poking the brush down every corner, round the gums, and would even give his tongue a good scrub. Of course, this was not some goody-goody lapse. This was pure opportunism. If some girl ever consented to tonsil tennis, Smell wanted to be damn sure she came back for a rematch. He was yet to realise how important things like field fresh armpits and clean jeans were to his campaign, but for your average 16-year-old into rock and roll, teeth were a pretty good start. Just coming up to midday and the temperature is pushing 80 degrees in the shade. It's one hot day, folks, again. In the news, there's continuing international condemnation over the deaths of black students in South Africa, protesting against the forced teaching of Afrikaans in their school. Hosepipe bans are still in force across southern England, and the government is talking about creating a minister for drought if the situation worsens. Meanwhile, Thin Lizzy is banging it out with the boys are back in town. This is Capital Radio 194. And that's my tune. Smell still had the toothbrush in his mouth, and he spattered a curve of blue toothpaste-coloured spit right across the mirror. He stood back and checked it out. It looked like one of those shooting stars from a Disney film. Cool. Not wanting to spoil great art, he left it where it was as it started to trickle down the mirror, and he leapt downstairs, pulling on the suspiciously pink t-shirt as he went. Phil Lynort's voice and bass banged out around the house, setting the pace as his mother threw Smell's noxious laundry into the Bendix, punctuating her well-aimed shots with each "boys are back in town." The Capital Radio blasted out through the transistor that sat on the kitchen cupboard. Smell was reasonably sure that the gas mask and the elbow-high contamination gloves that his mother were wearing were his imagination working overtime again, but he didn't stop to find out. His brother would be home any minute, and Smell needed to get out of the house before the t-shirt was removed from his back, probably with a rake. However, 16-year-old stomachs have their own itinerary, and Smells pulled the brakes on his legs before he got to the back door. Damn, fuel needed. Rewinding the tape back to the larder, Smell reached inside and grabbed a couple of slices of nimble bread, tasted like cotton wool flavoured with extract of soap, and a small square tin of corned beef. OK, so not exactly pre-prepared, but Smell had tried the combination before, and at least he hadn't died. He snatched a banana for extra flavouring and stepped out into the sun. "Don't you go dumping the tin outside. Get it into a bin." His mother missed nothing and neatly caught the flying and empty tin as it was tossed through the window. Quiet House Smell had consumed an entire tin of corned beef within 2 steps of the back door. She really didn't want to know, just as long as he hadn't got any on the t-shirt. Back in the sun, and Smell, now completely immersed in the idea of putting everything in his life to music, leapt over the front gate, caught his foot on a bit of the neatly trimmed privet hedge, and disappeared into the front garden next door. Lying on his back, the midday sun drying out the smear of corned beef on the t-shirt, he slowly became aware of being stared at upside down by a small, tubby white dog, mouth full of 2 slices of nimble bread. "I don't care what the ad says, mate. You ain't never going to fly like a bird." "Woof," agreed the dog, who had a sudden, joyous vision of scaring the hell out of all the pigeons that dive-bombed him in the back garden. "You're welcome to it, mate." With that, Smell leapt to his feet, bowed majestically to Mrs. Finch, the owner of the small white furball, who was standing in her front window, frowning, and let himself out of the front gate politely. One more bow, and he ran for it towards the old embankment. 16 years Smell had been on this planet, and he was pretty damn sure, mostly because the papers kept telling him, that this was the hottest summer anyone decent could remember. In many ways it was pretty cool. Having just done his O-levels, Smell had been kicked out of school 3 weeks before normal, so he and his friends had a long summer to look forward to. Great weather would make it pretty damn serious as far as he was concerned. On the other hand, he was playing 7 types of hell with his feet, and he was fairly sure he was going to have to dump the sneakers before they rotted. Anyway, time for a bit of a new image. Glam had got boring. The zips and black leather the Ramones were touting looked worryingly nasty, not to mention way too hot, and there was no way he was going to wear the spandex of the disco scene. So, jeans, shirts and sandals were going to be his new mantra. He knew he risked being slated as a stinking hippie, but in this weather he'd stopped caring. And anyway, Aroma seemed to like the more folksy and gypsy stuff, being Irish as she was, and what Aroma said was gospel as far as Smell was concerned. Oh yeah, Smell had promised himself not to think about Aroma too much. That line of dementia was causing him trouble, and the odd sleepless night. A drummer is a drummer is a drummer. You weren't meant to start fancying them, even if they were a beautiful and gorgeous Irish girl with big green eyes. Smell lived on a pretty typical sort of street in North London. It wasn't a wealthy place, and neither was it a council estate. It was a kind of in-between, nothing much to say for itself place that you find all over the southeast of England. The houses were mostly semis, with a very occasional detached house put in between. All the front rooms had small bays, and there were fake wooden beams up in the eaves of the roof. Beneath the downstairs windows was brick, but the rest of the house was white painted pebbled ash. The window frames were wood, the gutters cast iron, and these houses would probably stay sat where they were put for centuries. They were popular with a certain age of man because they were a solid build, and they were popular with the women who were still forced to do the washing because the gardens were a good size and had plenty of room for hanging out the clothes. All in all, it was a safe, dependable and completely predictable sort of street, and Smell hated it. Well, hate was probably a strong word, but then Smell always started by hating things and then sort of modified his views as he went along until he got to the point where he forgot that he'd hated anything in the first place. And if you were mad enough to say, "But you said you hated that," then you'd probably just get yourself hated, at least until Smell forgot he had hated you. The road, Birch Tree Avenue, was a long, not too steep hill that was bordered by cherry trees. Don't ask. About halfway down it was crossed by Grub Street, which predated about everything else around here, hence the odd name. At the crossroads, the designers of the estate had put a good-sized roundabout to accommodate a wonderful ring of huge and ancient elm trees. That was until 5 years ago, when the whole lot had died. Now it was just a grass mound with a sad 4-foot-tall oak sapling in the middle. Smell missed those huge elm trees. They had a warm feeling about them, were like gatekeepers against the invading cherry trees. When they'd been cut down, he asked one of the council workers if they would be planting birch trees instead. The Berkman looked at Smell with a puzzled face. Why? Smell collided with the red pillar box that was at the junction, shook the encroaching dizziness out of his head and turned right into Grub Street. He had no idea why Grub Street was called Grub Street. Maybe it was just because it had a lot of grubs in it at one point, or maybe it was not very clean, though that would be Grubby Street. Or whatever. Smell wanted to be still living in the 70s when he got to the end of the road, so he stopped wasting time working out the name. Grub Street, being older than the other roads that made up the estate, wound down the hill rather than ran straight. Instead of the same houses as the rest of the estate, but occasionally there was something different from an earlier age. These were probably old farmhouses, Smell thought, since they were bigger and often set a bit further back than the rest. There was one near the bottom that he really liked. It had a sort of gothic look to it. It was pretty big and had a tall wall round it. The local kids called it the ghost house. If he hadn't known who lived there, his imagination would have probably taken charge and come up with some pretty amazing but unlikely description. As it was, this was the home of the Dohertys, a large family of successful fun lovers from Dublin. The youngest of them was Alana, otherwise known as Aroma, the drummer of the Stink, and Smell fancied her like crazy. But all that was for later. Smell had an appointment with Haze down at the railway sheds, and he'd better get a move on. He'd said he'd be there an hour ago. Past the ghost house, Grub Street turned to the left and headed alongside an old railway embankment. Although this was suburban London and was pretty well built up, this bit could have almost been in the country if you squinted a bit and ignored the tatty row of lock-ups on the other side. Smell jumped over the old linked wire fence and scrambled up the embankment. The railway line had long since been taken away, even before Beecham got his hands on the railway system, and no one around here even remembered the line, let alone any trains running along it. It was mostly overgrown, but the top of the embankment where the line had been was surprisingly clear. Smell supposed this was probably the stone foundations for the track, or maybe too much tar and coal over the years or something, but he didn't really know or care much about it. It was just part of his route, and that was all he needed to know. Very few people came this way. It was simply off the radar. As far as most people knew, it didn't really go anywhere at all, so why bother with it? Smell knew different, of course, but he was damn sure he wasn't going to let on to anyone else. Where he had climbed up onto the tracks, or where the tracks had once been, he could look up and down for quite a way. It was pretty straight here, but the trees that had grown up either side meant that you could not see anything below the embankment. Behind him, the track ran about 200 yards before it hit a high fence. Behind that lay a big scientific institute, and the line ran no further. Ahead of Smell, the line ran for some considerable distance before slowly bending off to the right. Smell headed off this way. He liked it up here. Although he could hear London beyond the trees and bushes, he could not see it at all. The sound was mostly a dull rumble that never really went away. Some of that came from the A1, which was just a few streets beyond the houses and was 6 lanes of traffic heading in and out of the city. But a lot of it was just London itself, the people tramping around, the buildings breathing in and out, small roads, large roads, parks, shops, offices, homes, all messed up together into one huge snoring dragon. Sometimes you'd hear little pieces of detail emerging from the roar. A small dog would bark at a shadow, or a child who was a couple of gardens away would scream as she fell over her own feet, or maybe a police car with its two-tone wah 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 changing pitch as it went from one side to the other. And further into the sound, deeper, almost hidden, was a longer, softer roar. This was the centre of London, and was the backdrop to everything anyone living in this huge metropolis ever did, thought, saw or felt. Smell had visited other cities. He had cousins that lived in Manchester, and that place was no little town. But it did not have that London undercurrent, that solidity that said this place had grown far beyond the plans of its makers, and had now taken on a life of its own. A symbiotic relationship that fed off of and fed the inhabitants throughout the greater city. More than 7 million people lived here, and it would only get bigger, not smaller. Smell's father had once mentioned the London Ringways Plan. This was one of those mad schemes dreamed up by the Greater London Council that had got chopped and changed all over the place. But eventually some of it had been built with a section north of where they lived called the A1178. It was getting renamed, however, to the M25. There was talk of it eventually encircling London completely. Yeah, and pigs might fly. Many people said that if that happened, there would be nothing stopping the gap between Greater London and the Ring being stuffed with houses. And then the dragon will be bigger, Smell prophesied out loud to no one. Smell sauntered over the ancient railway bridge crossing Tangle Lane and around the bend in the tracks. He supposed that Tangle Lane was a small country lane at one point, pushing its way beneath the line like a mole making a tunnel. But now it was a dirty, smelly, potholed road that led to small workshops and light industry. You could get everything from MOTs to your saucepans re-enamelled down there. Many of the businesses were owned by Asian and West Indian families, and they were a tight-knit group. Smell went down there with his father every time their old Cortina started making funny noises. Frank's was the car's hospital. Frank was an old guy with white stubble peppering his African skin. Smell loved the bloke. There was nothing he did not know about cars, and he could keep anything running forever. A good thing, since the old Ford they owned had seen its best many years ago. Haze's uncle also had his builder's yard down here and was fiercely protective of his immigrant neighbours. It wasn't always easy being black in London, he had told Smell. Although they did not have a huge amount of trouble with racism in the area, there were some skinhead bother boy gangs, and they tended to target the small industrial state when they could be bothered. The West Indians didn't like calling the police. If the coppers sent in the SPG, they could be worse than the skins. So Haze's uncle used to call the local station on a direct number, put on his poshest, whitest accent, saying, "I'm terribly sorry, but we appear to be having a little bit of trouble. Could you send a couple of sergeants down here and tell the super I'll see him at the lodge on Sunday?" Worked every time. Sending older sergeants was a clever move. They knew everyone in the area, including the parents of the skins. They could resolve things in a way that a truncheon would just make worse. But if it did get out of control, they could wave a baton so well that it would make even the SPG wince. At 16, Smell had already been working on the healthy anti-establishment ideology that you do at that age, but even he had to admit to a serious respect for these men. Beyond the bridge, the railway line curved first to the right, then to the left, and then the cutting started widening out. This was just a single track line, and seemed only to lead to the small group of engine sheds that now confronted Smell. They were nothing massive, and Smell and his friends suspected they might have been a private line owned by a factory or something in Victorian times. Certainly this had all been abandoned for so long that none of them had found anyone who knew what they were talking about, let alone remembered what it had been used for. Haze had commented that this was a bit beyond weird. It was bleeding mystifying. I mean, here were 4 large sheds, one of them long enough to take several locos in a row, complete with maintenance pit, a big area for 8 or 10 shunting lines, and no one knew about it? What was more, it was all in pretty good nick, all told. Yeah, most of the windows were broken, there were even a few skeletons of the birds that had broken them, but some of the windows were more or less intact. Within the sheds themselves, there were few weeds, though plenty of dust. As Smell walked up to the narrow platform that ran down the side of the main shed, he heard a yell coming from inside. "I've been waiting here for sodden ages, you bastard." Haze had a way of summing up situations that was as concise as it was occasionally unprintable. His father was from Liverpool, and the faint Scouse accent that Haze had inherited made swearing so much better than Smell could ever do that Smell had almost given up swearing out of pure respect. Not quite, though. The unmistakable figure of Haze emerged from the building onto the platform and sat down on the edge, his legs hanging down like a couple of wooden posts. He had an easiness about him that sometimes scared Smell. Haze was one of those people who were born muscular. Not the sort of muscles that stood out like a bodybuilder. Just thick arms and legs and, well, the rest of him really. There was muscle rather than fat. Running into him was like throwing yourself against a rubber-clad concrete wall. It doesn't hurt, but it doesn't move either. He was also tall, a good foot taller than Smell. Smell reached out a hand and Haze hoisted him up and swung him onto the platform next to him. "I'm not that late. Your watch must be wrong." Smell picked a loose stone out of his old sneakers. The downside of this place was that the ground was mostly gravel and shingle. They tried playing footy here, but got fed up with looking like they'd been flayed. "You've been that late for as long as I've known you, and even if I didn't wear a dead accurate Timex watch, I would just assume that you were late and be right too." The downside of Haze was that he was also very sharp and could get to the end of a long, complicated sentence with such neatness as to leave their English teacher stuttering. Smell grunted. "Maybe. I had a washing issue." "Yeah, mine had to clear out today too. Must be a conspiracy." "So what are we doing down here? I thought we were trying to work out some rehearsal space for the band." Smell, Haze and a few others had started putting a band together. They had this mad dream that it would spend this long summer following their O-levels being really cool and rocking their world. To be fair, they could actually play, at least individually, and had even got a couple of songs sorted out. Putting that together in a way that didn't sound like two old blind dogs fighting over a dead cat was proving a bit harder, and they'd now been banned from every garage belonging to every parent they knew. Now they'd broken up from school, that had left them needing rehearsal space. "Well, down here is what we got." Haze was being obvious again, and Smell growled under his breath. "In case you hadn't noticed, we ain't some finger-in-your-ear folk band. We're pure rock and bloody roll, mate. Complete with strats, Rickenbacker bass, an electric piano and microphones. If we don't have power, we're just going to sound like some idiots off play school or Jackanory." "Indeed, my young friend. I'm only a month younger than you." "Youngish, friend. Anyway, my uncle has a solution. He's got an old generator he said we can have as long as we come and drag it away. It means keeping it filled up with 4-star, but as long as we don't start plugging in too much, we should be okay." Smell had visions of them all stinky of leaded petrol as they walked in convoy along the track carrying 1-gallon cans, and at 77p a gallon at the local Esso, they were going to have to save up. "I know," agreed Haze, "but we won't have to fork out on rehearsal rooms." Smell nodded appreciatively. It actually made sense, which was a bit of a first for one of their plans. "How much does this Jenny weigh?" "No idea," said Haze as he jumped down off the platform, "but we're going to need help, I reckon." "Coming?" "Whatever."